Parce que la crise actuelle comporte sa part de défis, mais aussi d'opportunités. Parce que les règles du jeu du commerce extérieur sont appelées à se transformer. Parce que les exportations québécoises représentent près de la moitié de notre PIB et parce que les entreprises d'ici doivent faire preuve d'agilité et de résilience pour assurer la relance et repenser l'après. La Fédération des chambres de commerce du Québec et BMO présente la nouvelle série de rencontres virtuelles 360 Corex. Invités réputés, thématiques d'actualité et solutions concrètes pour aborder cette nouvelle réalité. Une réflexion à 360 degrés pour faire le tour de la question. Les rencontres virtuelles 360 Corex, ensemble pour propulser la relance.
Alors, bonjour tout le monde. Hi everyone. Je me présente. Mon nom est Charles Milliard, président directeur général de la Fédération des chambres de commerce du Québec. So I'm the CEO of the Federation of Chambers of Commerce of Quebec. Je vous souhaite la bienvenue à ce webinaire donc dans la série 360 Corex, une série que vous connaissez déjà bien depuis quelques mois, qui est notre réponse un peu finalement à cette foutue pandémie qui nous afflige tous pour qu'on puisse continuer quand même de discuter d'opportunités d'affaires pour les exportateurs québécois, principalement sur le marché nord-américain aujourd'hui. Série qui est en collaboration avec BMO Banque de Montréal. Donc, je salue mon bon ami Claude Gagnon, qui est président BMO Groupe financier Québec et qui nous adressera donc, comme à l'habitude, quelques mots en clôture d'événement. Je vous rassure, nous ne parlerons pas le bilingue pendant 1h15, donc on va switcher, comme on dit, en anglais, mais nous essayons aujourd'hui un service de traduction, donc avec la collaboration de Zoom. Alors, ceux et celles qui voudraient entendre les propos de nos invités et les miens en français, vous pouvez cliquer donc sur le petit globe terrestre en bas à droite, là, interprétation, et ça devrait fonctionner. Vous pouvez évidemment écrire dans le chat si vous avez des problèmes avec le service de traduction. So welcome to this webinar. I think it's, well, I don't think, it is a true privilege for the FCCQ and myself to host this event today with such distinguished guests. I would also add that they are very busy people. And I think that having the three of you on the line, gentlemen, is a first, especially in Canada. And so we're very proud it's happening at the FCCQ for this lunch period. I want to thank my colleagues, Claudine Carpentier and Florent Favrel, who worked tirelessly with your respective teams in making this happen today at the FCCQ. I also want to thank the many chambers of commerce in our network that helped us in gathering everybody on the line today. We have close to 200 people from all across Quebec. So I want to name them. It's quite a long list, but I think it's worth it. Alors, l'Alliance des chambres de commerce de Chaudière-Appalaches, la Chambre de commerce de Baie-des-Chaleurs, de Gatineau, de Lévis, Val-d'Or, Saint-Jérôme métropolitain, Vallée-du-Richelieu, Bois-Franc-Érable, Rive-Sud, Vaudreuil-Soulanges, le Cœur du Québec, la Chambre d'industrie, de commerce et d'industrie Limoulins, Sherbrooke et le regroupement des chambres du Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. So if you know a bit of Quebec, gentlemen, we truly have people from all across Quebec today with us, and we're very proud of it. We do have some VIP guests as well, and I want to acknowledge their presence. So we do have a former Premier of Quebec, the Honorable Jean Charest, with us today. Donc, bonjour, Monsieur Charest. Catherine Loubier, Delegate General of Quebec in New York City. Alors, bonjour, Catherine. And last but not least, Raymond Chrétien, Strategic Advisor at Fasken and former Ambassador of Canada to the US, France, Belgium, Mexico, and the Congo. So thank you to the three of you for being with us. For this webinar today, we have three main objectives. The first one being to hear, obviously, the perspectives of the CEOs of the three national chambers of commerce. You know that they have been key players in the NAFTA renegotiation process and the implementation of USMCA, ASEUM, CUSMA, whichever way you want to call it. I want to point as well that FCCQ has been playing an active role along the years in that regard, especially through our COREX program that is gathering us today, and the development of trade corridors with the help of the Gouvernement du Québec. And as you know, gentlemen, Mr. Salazar and Donahue, Quebec is the second largest market in Canada, so it's very important for us to hear you today on this important matter. The second objective being obviously to highlight the influential but also unifying role that the chambers of commerce, but also the business communities as a whole can play to overcome the challenges our economies can face and are facing actually, especially with this pandemic. And last but not least of the objectives, and especially because we're all political junkies, at least that's what I think, to assess the impact of the new president-elect Joe Biden, so the impact that it may have on the North American trade relations. So I'm not sure I need to pull out some stats on our business relationship, but still, 486 million consumers, a combined GDP of more than 22 trillion US dollars. In 2017, the total trilateral merchandise trade reached nearly 1.1 trillion US dollars. And obviously, we're not only selling goods and services to each other, we're also jointly manufacturing those goods so that they can find markets across the globe. So let's get down to the main show. Our guests today are managing their country's top chamber of commerce. They have obviously extensive experience in the private sector, extensive knowledge of the public sector as well. So they really know their politics inside out. So I want to extend my warmest welcome to Thomas J. Donahue, the Chief Executive Officer of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. So welcome, sir. Thank you so very much for being with us. Also, Señor Carlos Salazar Lomelin, Chairman of the Consejo Coordinador Empresarial. Bienvenidos, señor Salazar. Gracias por su presencia entre nosotros hoy. Et finalement, Monsieur Perrin Beatty, Président et chef de la direction de la Chambre de commerce du Canada. So thank you, Perrin, for being with us as well. So as far as the agenda goes, we'll have some opening remarks from our three guests, and then I'll conduct a question period from questions that we already received from some of you, from the participants, and from those who cannot attend, who could not attend as well. And then we'll go to a live question period. So I'm gonna allow you to open your camera if you raise your hand, but you can also write questions in the Q&R section as you do in all those Zooms in your 2020 life. Si vous voulez aussi poser des questions en français, ça me fera plaisir là, avec l'aide de mes collègues de les traduire pour nos participants. So it could be in either English or French. So without further ado, I'm gonna ask our first guest, Mr. Donahue, to address the audience. So have a great webinar, everyone. Mr. Donahue. If you can just unmute yourself.
Work. It did.
All right.
Well, very nice to be with you all. Thank you for inviting us. I want to thank the Quebec Federation of Chambers for hosting this event. Anytime we can get all three countries of the NAFTA agreement together, it's a good thing because we're very involved still in putting this whole new agreement together. I'm pleased particularly to be here with my colleagues, Perrin Beatty and Carlos. Carlos, I was glad, didn't have a chance to say hello, but I saw you coming in. I know you've been busy. In fact, I'm going to call you. I have a few matters we have to work on. We've been partners, the three of us, during very, very interesting times as we've worked on this agreement and on fundamental issues of immigration, of trade, of national security, and anytime that one needs help, the other two of us try and step in. Today, all of us are operating in an environment of uncertainty. And why? How will this surging pandemic affect the countries through this winter? And what effect will that have on our economies? How quickly and vigorously will our economies recover from the shocks of this year? And in the US, when will the political drama come to an end? Control of the Senate now rests on two runoff races in the state of Georgia taking place on January 5th. At least one of the senators running for re-election must win for the Republican Party to hold on to the Senate. If they were to lose both, then it'd be a tie, and the vice president, Kamala Harris, would be the person that breaks the tie, unless members of the Democratic Senate were to do so in a way that joined with the Republicans. After a few weeks of uncertainty, we were happy to see the recent announcement that the incoming Biden administration has been able to begin their transition to power. Allowing the official transition to begin doesn't preclude legal challenges from running their course, but if you just look at today's papers, it's about run. But further delaying the transition would risk undermining national security, the management of the public health crisis, and our economic recovery at a very critical moment. And this adds up to a lot of uncertainty. So we're all glad to see moving in a positive direction. You know, when it comes to the relationship between our nations, however, there is little uncertainty. There's always some question of what we do with one matter or another, but the US-Mexican-Canadian agreement has restored clarity, and it will ensure that robust trade across the Northern Hemisphere will help revitalize our economies. Just think about where we were this time 3 years ago. We didn't know if NAFTA would survive or if it would be replaced with a trilateral deal. We had to fight vigorously to preserve our trade ties, to keep all three countries at the table, and to defeat a number of very bad proposals that would have sunk the whole deal. We worked hard and we worked together. That was the critical issue. Governments may have been going one way or the other, but we worked together. And as a result, today, we have a stronger modern trade agreement as the foundation of our economic relationship. With the USMCA now in force, we're able to focus on the implementation of the deal. There are two sets of things in implementation, and that is lining it up and setting up the arrangements, but the other is doing it, trading. And by the way, we've kept trading through all of this because our economies are so interdependent. We know that without one, the other does not succeed. We've worked hard and we've worked together, and as a result, we're in much better shape. With the USMCA in force, we're working and we're engaging on a wide range of implementation activities. For example, the US dairy farmers are keen to ensure that they can take advantage of increased market access across with Canada. In Mexico, we're working to ensure successful implementation of the customs chapter, among others. There have also been a number of legislative and regulatory changes in Mexico that appear to be in conflict with the USMCA in areas such as energy policy, cloud regulation, government procurement, and biotech approvals. Carlos, I suspect there is feeling in Mexico that there are some behavior activities or work in finalizing these regulations that in the United States that are somewhat of a problem for our friends in Mexico. Of course, everything is fine with the Canadians. By the way, the need for increased cooperation on energy is not unique to the US-Mexico side. The Keystone Pipeline is the most ambitious binational energy project the US and Canada have advanced, and with most of the cross-border section already completed, the US has got to ensure the pipeline is completed and quickly. Additionally, we continue to focus on other related priorities. One is ensuring the supply chain's integrity. We should use the lessons of the past year to prioritize establishing a coordinated North American policy on maintaining essential functions and services in time of crisis. Even if there is a light at the end of the tunnel with very promising vaccines, the COVID case counts are rising sharply in the winter and probably will go higher. And it's possible there's going to be additional lockdowns. It's more important than ever, though, that the three governments permanently align emergency response activities and their definition of essential services. That way, we'll know what to do when the time comes. When the next crisis strikes, having taken this step, we will spare us the rampant supply chain dislocation that we experienced when our pandemic took off. Another priority is strengthening regulatory cooperation. For years, North American business community has worked with all three governments to enhance regulatory cooperation through initiatives like the Regulatory Cooperation Council and the high-level economic dialogue that the government was doing, while we, the business community, have been working before each government meeting so that we can tell them what we think. It is time to reinvigorate these constructive dialogues and offer innovative proposals that will lower the cost of doing business in our region and maximize our collective competitiveness. Similarly, we have a tremendous opportunity to further optimize our shared borders through revamped infrastructure and data-driven processes, and I hope a really serious immigration bill in the United States. We can ensure our borders are both secure and efficient, maximizing legitimate trade and unleashing the benefits of e-commerce. Thankfully, the USMCA sets the framework for collaboration in all of these areas by establishing key committees on competitiveness, trade facilitation, and other important issues. Because of the efforts of the US, Canadian, and Mexico business communities to ensure the USMCA was approved and implemented, we entered into this period of significant uncertainty in a position of strength. We were hit by the pandemic, but we had our agreement. Let me say, as I conclude, is no matter what happens in the coming weeks, months, and years, we know what we must do. Organizations like ours must advocate boldly for the policies that will allow our countries to return to health and return to strength. Our members will help lead the recovery, and we will do it together. A revitalized North American economy can help drive global growth, and that's what's critically important. Not long ago, the U.S. Chambers Foundation hosted Bill and Melinda Gates for a discussion on the path forward out of the pandemic. And they offered a key insight: none of us will be out of the woods until all of us are out of the woods. This extraordinary year has reminded all of us that we live in an interconnected world. As we confront new challenges and uncertainties, I'm thankful that the United States has such great friends, partners, and neighbors as our friends in Canada and Mexico. The Chamber remains committed to strengthening the North American economic relationship for the benefit and the progress and the enjoyment of the three nations. And I want to thank you very much, Charles, for the opportunity to be here. And I'm now, I'm glad I went first because now I can relax for a while and listen to what everybody else has to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Donahue. So I'm going to ask Mr. Salazar to go next, please. You need to unmute your mic, sir. There you go.
Yes, excuse me. Good morning to everyone watching us in Canada. I am seeing that we have almost 200 participants in this important event from Canada, United States, and Mexico. I want to thank you, Charles, for organizing this important virtual event. And I think it's very, very important, as Tom said, that we remain together and we work together in front of all of the challenges that we have for the future. I'm very glad to share this panel with my colleagues, my good friend Tom Donahue from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, with Perrine Beatty from the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and with Claude Gagnon from the BMO Financial Group. We are living in challenging and interesting times. After these years of an arduous renegotiation process, our renewed regional agreement, the USMCA, the CUSMA, or the TEMEC, as we call the agreement, came into force during the unprecedented sanitary and economic crisis. Our countries have been close partners for almost 3 decades, framed by cutting-edge agreements directing our trade relations. And this new one is not the exception. To achieve these deals, the participation of the private sector of Mexico, Canada, and the United States, and the collaboration between us and our governments has been and will still be fundamental. Since the announcement of the renegotiation process, the US Chamber, the Canadian Chamber, and the CCE openly asked for a trilateral win-win-win agreement to increase our region's competitiveness and bring more jobs for our countries, preserving the benefits of the former agreement and creating more opportunities toward the 21st century. And we achieved it. The CUSMA is currently one of the most modern and comprehensive trade agreements worldwide, which incorporates issues such as the electronic commerce, the SMEs, the transparency, anti-corruption, competitiveness, and among others. As we established in our joint statement with the agreement entered into force, the CUSMA preserves and depends commercial ties between our 3 countries, providing a necessary guarantee for the North American economy, which represents around 28% of the global GDP and 16% of our world trade. Today, our economies rely on this agreement, not just for the creation of economic growth and jobs in a changing global context, but for the reactivation of our economies after the crisis. This is why the CUSMA's correct implementation must be at the top of the agendas of our chambers and our governments. This agreement can turn our North America region into a global trading powerhouse as we move into the 21st century and the new normal than the COVID pandemic is creating. We have been experiencing a global trend towards more protectionist policies, but at the same time, towards regionalization. In this context, our three countries from one of the most competitive regions in the world. Now, more than ever, we must strengthen the idea of a strong and competitive North America. Having a close regional community will create economies of scale, cost reduction, and trust investments, leading to an increase in competitiveness, more jobs, and less inequality. A better future depends on whether we can correctly exploit our comparative and competitive advantage. We must build a more productive and integrated North America and create more inclusive and resilient regional dynamics. We have to reinforce the correct operation of existing regional value chains for the new normal context, which will demand more security and efficiency of the allocation of resources. The pandemic has taught us that we need a more closer coordination on this front. We must also promote a strengthened strategic value chains based on technology-intensive industries. We should foster our trade in services, which presents major opportunities for our three countries. A big challenge is to identify opportunities to attract investments and supply chains to North America, especially from China and Asia in general. We must work on building products and services made in North America because we can achieve more when we work together. This will be the best way to boost our competitiveness and productivity. Our new agreement can help to achieve all of this, but it also presents challenges ahead. In Mexico, we are working hard to inform all the businesses in Mexico about the new labor and environmental measures. And we have been working closely with key industries to meet the new adjustments to the rules of origin. From the Mexican private sector, we have developed auto-diagnosis tool that help businesses identify possible labor risks, and we are working closely with the government to identify any issues that might harm economic activity. Moreover, we need to promote and ask for certainty for investments in the regions. Businesses are eager to invest, but given the necessary guarantees to do so. For this, governments must reinforce clear rules, harmonize regulations, and promote the rule of law. I am certain that if we can collaborate to bring solutions to current problems and find opportunities to strengthen our relation and businesses in the long term. For this, the private sector for the three countries must work closely, and in turn, we must also collaborate with our governments to achieve the best possible results for our nations. As we have said before, the private sector of Canada, Mexico, and the United States maintain a relationship of friendship founded not only on the borders that unite us, but on shared interests and mutual respect for free enterprise, free markets, and open trade. This is an outstanding moment to reinforce our previous collaboration and begin a trilateral working platform between the private and public sectors of our three countries in order to achieve the best outcome for our countries. Now, more than ever, we must work together to overcome the hard consequences of the pandemic and to consolidate a strong and inclusive North America. Thank you, Charles.
Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Mr. Salazar. And then, last but very not least, live from Ottawa, Mr. Perrin Beatty. Perrin.
Merci, Charles. Bienvenue, mesdames et messieurs. Tom and Carlos, welcome to Canada, even virtually. We're delighted to have you here. The US election and its implications for Canada have saturated our media cycle over the last few weeks. And inevitably, they're going to continue to do so right through to Inauguration Day. And we'll also get into that subject more in the questions and answers a little bit later. So what I'd like to talk about over the next few moments is the important role that chambers of commerce and the business community can play in our continental advocacy efforts. Now, it's an understatement to say that understanding business concerns is patchy at best within governments. This is not a unique Canadian phenomenon. Among the core mandates for chambers of commerce is translating the concerns and the views of the business community to government policymakers. And another role is translating government activities back to businesses. Now, this is no different in a North American context. During the renegotiation of the NAFTA, the Canadian Chamber was active in attending negotiating rounds and in constant contact with government officials to ensure that they understood in tangible terms how negotiation issues would affect businesses. It also meant ensuring that our businesses understood what was on the negotiating table and how it would impact them. We also did this on the steel and aluminum tariffs, where we mobilized the Canadian business community through the Keep Trade Free Coalition. Now, while the results on both fronts were successful, renegotiation of our country's most critical free trade agreement and the lifting of the so-called national security tariffs, we did not do it alone. The US Chamber and the CCE were partners in the effort. And I must say, when we're dealing with the US Chamber is far and away Canada's closest friend and ally. They certainly have been a superb assistance to Canada in trying to ensure that the borders remain open and the trade remains free. Now, in 2017, we created the North American Economic Alliance. Looking back at our 2017 founding statement, I'm glad that in retrospect to see that we accomplished a number of our key objectives. The first objective among them was the imperative to keep the agreement trilateral. For more than 2 decades, companies relied on a set of coherent continental rules, and creating diverges would have been disruptive for companies whose supply chains were predicated on being able to move products across the border. Businesses had invested on the basis of a trilateral agreement, and it was critical for us to maintain that trilateralism as we went forward. In some measures, we also managed to achieve a modernization. Although there were some exceptions, the addition of provisions on digital trade and modernized customs provisions are examples of new elements that will assist companies. Importantly, it was also a quick negotiation. The end of the negotiation felt abrupt when we were living through it at the time, and the pace was indeed intense out, but to the credit of all 3 governments, it went exceptionally quickly compared to most trade negotiations. That meant businesses were not left with years of protracted uncertainty through a long, prolonged negotiation. Now, in working together as a coherent group, there are a few things worth underscoring. Speaking with a coordinated voice is absolutely key. Governments have a cacophony of stakeholders approaching them every day. I saw this firsthand during my time in government. When industry groups are able to convene under a single umbrella and to deliver common messages, it's much easier for governments to make sense of what stakeholders are looking for. Furthermore, it means greater credibility to what you're saying if you speak with one voice. If we'd not acted in partnership, it would have been easier for our governments to cherry pick what issues they wanted to address in the negotiations, as opposed to responding to a common voice from government. Now, information sharing was also critical. Every government has its own political imperatives and will manage its stakeholders in different ways. This includes what information is shared and how it may or may not be spun. Having our organizations work together during the negotiations provided an invaluable service by comparing notes what we were hearing. It was very useful for us when we were talking to our own governments to also be able to share information with our colleagues in the other countries at the level of the business associations, to have a more comprehensive sense as to where the governments were coming from, what was on the table, and what were the reactions among the business communities of the three countries. This gave us and our members a much more comprehensive understanding of the negotiations, since no one organization would otherwise have had the full picture. That information in turn allowed us to better serve our members and helped us to shape the advice that we provided to government. There's much work ahead, which we'll discuss in the question and answer portion, Charles. So let me stop here and say that I'll look to questions from the audience.
All right, merci beaucoup, Perrin. Thank you to the three of you for those very comprehensive speeches, very enlightening. So thank you again for being with us. I was looking at the questions that we received, and you've answered a couple of them, but still, and given the time we have, why don't I ask you one question each, and then we'll move to the audience to see if there's any live questions, which I know there is. So Mr. Donahue, well, obviously it's fair to say that overall this agreement is very well received. It's a positive thing for our region's competitiveness. Nevertheless, are there any shortcomings? Is there something missing in this agreement from the American perspective?
Well, we all have a list, and they are technical issues, and I have a whole group of things we're working on. But that is very important. If everything were resolved, we would be in a totally different position, because what would be disappearing is the ingenuity, the problem solving, the ability for the business community to work together and with its government to take care of whatever is in front of it. Obviously, there are certain, each of us could go around the room and be interested in, things in agriculture, in privacy, in data. But, those things are changing every day. What we got in this agreement is a process that lets us fix those things going forward, lets us add things as we were affected, and we are affected by what's going on in the global trading system. I mean, one just watches where we both have agreements, the EU, and we've got more problems collectively there than we have amongst ourselves. But they're all, usually new and difficult questions around technology, around the questions of what's happening with the integrated trade relationships, around what's the United States going to do about the Pacific Agreement, this new agreement that's just been put together by a group in Asia. The reality is that the three countries that are here today have to recognize what a huge percentage of global trade is in Asia and how much it'll continue to grow. But if we do what we do, what this treaty is intended to make happen, we'll be very competitive, very successful, and leaders in how things are going to be done.
Thank you. I said I wanted to ask you different questions, but then I'm eager to know what Perrin thinks about any possible shortcomings of this agreement from a Canadian perspective.
Let me start with what's right about it, Charles. And the first thing is consider the alternative. What we were looking at was the possible breakup of NAFTA and an explosion of trade wars within North America. That would have been disastrous for North American business and certainly for Canadian business. We avoided that. And so saving the furniture was itself a major achievement on the part of our governments. If I were looking at where's the disappointment, Tom and Carlos, you'll remember in our declaration at the front end, we asked for our governments to have an ambitious agreement, to take NAFTA as a base that we could build upon to create something that was more integrated and more successful. I don't think there was the level of ambition. The ambition was saving the furniture to a large extent and preventing something that would have been disastrous from happening. And we were, as Tom pointed out, we were able to make some advances in some areas. If I would look at one area in particular where I would have liked to have seen more progress, it would have been in terms of mobility. The list of occupations was drawn up, I guess, was in 1994, I believe. The economy was just fundamentally different at that time. And as a result, many of the occupations on the list just don't make sense today. And it would have made much more sense for us to update that list and to allow much greater mobility within the business community in North America. If we could have achieved that, that would have been an important step forward. But there's no reason why we shouldn't be setting that as a goal now. And in addition to that, I'd make the point, Cheryl, that we have the ability. The US, with the new administration coming in, is re-engaging in North America. The idea of North America is alive again. And this means that in areas that both Carlos and Tom mentioned, for example, about regulatory cooperation, there's an opportunity for us to move significantly forward in this area if we're ambitious. So I think we should be very encouraged at this point in saying all that USMCA does is give us the base to work from. And there's much more that we can do.
Merci, Perrin. Well, why don't I ask the same question to Mr. Salazar as to what's missing in this agreement from a Mexican perspective? And then, Mr. Salazar, if you don't mind, we know very much how things are going with the pandemic in Canada and the US, but how are things in Mexico with the COVID-19, and how is it affecting enterprises? And is there a way the agreement with Canada and US can help the recovery of the Mexican economy, please?
Let me try to ask first the first question that you have made to my colleagues, because I think it's important to comment that in the Mexican perspective, we have missing at least a couple of things that, in my opinion, are very, very important. One was addressed by Perrin. I think in the future, we have to push up the mobility between our countries. For us, it's important, very important, to solve all the migration problems that we are facing. You know that Mexico have been very well in cooperation with US in order to control all the flows of people that come from Central America and South America, and try to plan with together and align with US how is the best way to control this problem that obviously we are facing. But in the future, all of this, in my opinion, are a very important potential for our countries and for our region. And we had to deal with that to face not just as a problem, to face as an opportunity in which we have to control all of these flows of people that obviously the only thing that they wanted is to work. And we can control all of these things for the future. This is one of the things that, in my opinion, remain as a very important issue that we have to address for the future. The second is the asymmetry that we have between our countries. Obviously, the infrastructure of Mexico, when you compare the infrastructure of Mexico with US and Canada, we have a huge lack in the infrastructure of our country. We have been in progress in the last years in Mexico in order to improve our roads and our border, but we are a lot behind the infrastructure that you can offer. I would have wanted to see in the agreement some help from Canada and US in order to try to balance the differences in infrastructure that we have in Mexico when you compare with Canada and US. For those reasons, I think we have a lot of work to do in the future. And we have to talk together, as Perrin said, to share information between us, to understand each other and the problems that we are going to face in the present and in the future. And your second question related with the COVID. Obviously, we are expecting and waiting that the new vaccines come as soon as possible to our countries. We have a lot of hope that we're going to go to the normality or the new normality that we're going to have after this pandemic. And we expect that all of these things improve the situation that we are faced. Until now, we are crossing a very, very difficult time. We have a problem again at the same levels that we face in the month of April of May in some cities of Mexico. Our authorities of health are in the process to control these corners in which we have problems or problems like the same levels that we face, as I said, in the month of April or May. And I believe that we are trying to do the best thing with the elements that we have. Again, we are facing a problem in the infrastructure of our hospitals, our clinics, and all the infrastructure in health that we have in Mexico. Taking in account that we have this lack of infrastructure in the health side, I think we are doing the best possible things that we can organize with the elements that we have on hand.
Thank you very much. Very comprehensive answer. Very appreciated. Thank you, Mr. Salazar. So why don't we move to the audience for live questions? And the first question would go to our former Premier, Jean Charest, who is with us, as I mentioned earlier. Monsieur Charest, vous êtes là?
Oui, oui, merci beaucoup. J'espère que vous m'entendez bien. D'abord, je veux vous féliciter, Monsieur Milliard, pour l'organisation de ce panel d'un calibre exceptionnel et rare. Je n'ai pas de souvenir d'avoir pu être sur le même panel. Je voulais saluer également deux bons amis, notre délégué général du Québec à New York, Catherine Loubier, puis l'ambassadeur du Canada, Raymond Chrétien, l'ambassadeur qui était à la fois ambassadeur aux États-Unis et au Mexique, ce qui est en soi unique. It's a real pleasure to see you, Mr. Salazar, and to welcome you virtually to both Canada and Quebec. And Tom, we've had the pleasure of hosting you many times here, and find ourselves very fortunate to have you as a friend to Canada, a very good friend, as is the case for Perrin and I, who had the pleasure of working together. And to hear all three of you, just the fact that the three of you are together sends a very powerful message, and especially at this time. There's a number of issues, I guess, to raise. One of them, I would have been curious to hear about your view on China and how we as a continent respond. I think, Tom, you mentioned the regional comprehensive economic partnership just signed into by 16 countries, which may very well structure and organize Asia in a way we've never seen before, even if it's not the level of a trade agreement that we have here or elsewhere in the world, and the whole relationship with China, which is challenging for everyone. But I want to, and I also am curious about supply chains. I think the pandemic has shed a whole new light on the reality of supply chains. But I don't think a lot of people know how much the trade is supply chain based. And I think the percentage of products coming from Mexico going to the United States, 40% of those products are American, if I may be wrong, and 25% of products going from Canada to the United States are American. So it speaks to the integration of the supply chains. And I'd be curious to hear about that. But the immediate question for Canada, and both Tom and Perrin, you would know about this, is Mr. Biden's proposal for a very robust Buy America legislation. And it would be much better if we were able to get in touch with or work with the transition teams and avoid this legislation being tabled, or at least take into account the fact that the supply chain is North American and not have to fight a rear guard battle against this. In 2008-09, when the TARP legislation was done, what we did was a reciprocity agreement with a support pair, and you'll remember the provinces, it was a first to avoid the negative consequences, especially on procurement. So maybe that's the most urgent question in my mind for Canada as we now deal with this new government. Thank you very much. Merci, Charles.
Excellent, thank you. Who wants to go first?
I will.
Why don't you start?
I made 3 notes of what you asked, and China was the first, and I think that was a very, very good question because it ties into the major point you made about Buy America. First of all, you know, we fought against tariffs during this whole period of time. We still have them. Some of them not as bad as they were, or a lot of them not as bad as they would have been if we weren't very tough about it. The reason I don't like tariffs, by the way, we pay them. Why do you, if you put a tariff on something that we're selling you, you pay the tariff. Who invented that idea? But let me say just 3 big things. 95% of the people that we want to sell something to don't live in the United States. Huge percentage of the people that Mexico and Canada want to sell something to don't live in their home countries. We are by nature a global trading deal because trading is all about customers. Now, the idea of Buy America is something we've dealt with for a long, long time. And both of my colleagues are politically aware, and they know that that generally shows up during election times. You know, I try and remind our colleagues, if we just did everything in America, we'd be a pittance of the economy that we actually are. And I am clear in my mind that Biden's real thought about Buy America is with all of the challenges with China. Now, I want to say that I've had long personal relationships with China, and we have relationships with them now around pandemics and things. Some people accusing them of something, but others smart enough to take advantage or to get their help on a lot of this. Their scientific people in this regard are very good. But I thought it was great that our president got tough with China. We all have trading issues with China, and getting tough with them was a good idea. I'm not sure I would have kept the tough going as a part of his election, but I think what Biden is going to talk about Buy America, but we can't buy enough stuff in America. We can't sell all our stuff to America. So we're going to be much different than you would expect there. And what I hope on the China deal is that we keep our finger on the button and we stay strong on dealing on these trade issues, but at the same time, we build relationships on other matters and in the trading relationship that aren't personal, they're business. If we do that, I think we're going to do much better. And so don't worry. So I'll worry about the Buy America thing because I don't want to be weakened by that. There are some things because of the pandemic and otherwise, we ought to make sure we have adequate supplies or we do some of that ourselves. And Perrin, when you get a moment, maybe you could talk about what you think in Canada about the idea that, that we should export all of our pricing on pharmaceuticals to you. That's a dumb idea for us because we can't be able to afford the research. Anyway.
Just a quick comment, maybe Perrin, and then Mr. Salazar.
Yes, Charles. I like a lot the comment and the answer that John made, because remember us that we have a lot of work to face for the future. I think it's important the comment that in all of these political presentations of the people right now in the political career of U.S. The Buy America, all obviously sell a lot of comments and a lot of people vote for him with this kind of promises. But the most important thing and the challenge for us is try to convince all the members of our organizations that we are just as a fact together, and that we have a very strong relationship that you can measure with this value chain, in which we have in all our products a very, very important integration of the products that we produce in Mexico, US, and Canada. And this is, in my opinion, a very important challenge. We have to learn how is the best way to communicate the integration that we have reached between our countries. And that when you talk about a product that was manufactured in US, this product has some parts of Canada, some parts of Mexico, and at the end of the day, is a product that has been produced in North America. The most important thing is try to convince all the people that we are in a fact together, and that these deals are going to make more strong relationship among our countries.
Perrin?
Charles, I realize that we're running short of time. I'll try to respond quickly. Tom, on pharmaceuticals, we certainly agree with you. And indeed, some of the proposals that have been made, for example, by Bernie Sanders, would have the impact on Canada of creating shortages in Canada as a consequence. Wouldn't be in our interest, certainly, to do that. Jean's questions with regard to supply chains and Buy America. One of the good surprises, I think, coming out of the pandemic was the resiliency of our supply chains. I did not expect that both international global supply chains and North American supply chains would work as well as they have. And they've worked remarkably well under very trying circumstances. Having said that, we're going to be finding that, that companies are going to be, and countries are going to be taking a different approach. We did see pandemic protectionism taking place. And that may very well result in countries like Canada saying, some of these goods we're going to have to produce in Canada simply because we can't count on others to supply them when we need them most. Secondly, companies are going to be looking, when we saw in Wuhan, the shutdown of industry there was concern in terms of the ability of availability of supplies. So companies will be diversifying their suppliers, possibly across countries. They will be stockpiling, they'll be increasing their inventories in case of disruptions. And in many cases, there'll be nearshoring. In those cases of nearshoring, we should be encouraging people to be looking at North America as the place to do that, which brings us then to Buy America. I think it's important for us to make the case strongly that with CUSMA, we have a deeply integrated North American industrial base. We shouldn't partition that. And when we're focusing on buying more locally, it should be buy North American and look at the efficiencies we can develop within North America. And all three of our countries should be, and all three of our organizations should be reaching out to make the case that we should not be dividing and partitioning North America. We need to strengthen that industrial base.
Thank you, Perrin. Merci, Monsieur Charest. We have 9 minutes left, and I'd like you to answer 2 more questions. So we'll move rapidly with Catherine Loubier, Quebec's Delegate General in New York, and then we'll move on to a last question. Catherine.
Oui, merci, Charles. Thank you. It's a very impressive panel that you have today. Thank you for putting this together. I have a bit of the same question as Mr. Charest, but I'll give it another twist. So, of course, Quebec is concerned with this Made in America policy proposal that commits to, American workers and supply chains are composed of American small businesses. We understand the goal. Mr. Salazar, you talked about communicating better on the integration of those supply chains. And I think this is key as well. And Mr. Beatty, you pointed out that the pandemic shed light on the integration of our supply chains. I agree with that, but I think we can do more. You know, we've been building those supply chains since the Great War for many of them. President-elect Biden proposes to purchase American steel, cement, concrete. We're wondering if that's even possible.
No.
And at the same time, he's you know, calling for reducing our dependence on China to work amongst allies. So my question is, are we going to build North American and create North American champions to compete globally, or face more protectionism in one of the first executive order of the president?
Who wants to get this one? Mr. Salazar.
Yes, I think it's a very good point, Catherine. I think it's important, the information, and to share what we are going to address in the future between our countries. But it's very important also to see that this difficult that we have to understand what kind of policy China is going to pursue in the future is a very important opportunity for our three countries. If we can try to translate this value chain that was created between US and China. It's impressive when you analyze the figures, the numbers, about the dependence that the United States has with China in order to import a lot of products that can be produced in North America. We have all the competitive advantage and all the knowledge to produce all of these products in Canada, Mexico, or US. It's important, as a conclusion of your comment, yes, to communicate better, to have a better understanding of how is the meaning of our agreement, but at the same time, to be more proactive and take all these opportunities that we can create in the areas of new investments and in the areas of strength, our value chains, manufacturing processes.
Any other comments before we move to the last question?
Yeah, very quickly. Serious economic advancement requires investment, but most of all, it requires relationships and adequate human talent. When you think about the relationship, the North American relationship, it meets many of our problems. We have enough capital. The United States is a country with people without jobs and many, many more jobs than that without people. We need an immigration bill. We need to improve our ability to move goods across the border. And we need to convince everybody that if Mexico shuts down for 4 or 5 days in a lot of their parts factories, US car manufacturers are out of business. If Canada and the United States, which do the same kind of thing, there are a lot of things that we make for each other. It's hard to get to some folks that always want to blame somebody else for their, problems. We're in the solution business, and we'll do very well on that. We have an economy that's picking up, but we need people. We need to work with each other, and we'll deal with all this Buy America stuff.
Right.
Buy North America.
Buy North America.
And I certainly want to underscore the point that my colleagues have made. I don't want to see us move back from globalization, although we're seeing the concept of globalization under siege around the world today. And that includes by the behavior of China in many ways, which has made it difficult. And we in Canada are well aware of some of the strains that are being experienced today. Charity in many ways begins at home. If we look at what we can do for the business communities in our three countries, strengthening that North American industrial base is a very good place to start. And I remember George Shultz commenting that when he was Secretary of State in Ronald Reagan's government, the first thing that President Reagan wanted to do was to visit the neighborhood, Mexico and Canada. And that's a very good place for Joe Biden to start. He has friends. He will be very welcome in doing that, and we can revive the idea of North America and revive the strength of North America.
Yeah, and I think, and the invitation is already out, so, so we're just waiting for him to answer. We have 4 minutes left. Last questions from Guillaume Dubreuil. Maybe Guillaume, if you can address your question to someone specific, please, in a matter of time.
Merci beaucoup, Charles, et félicitations pour le panel. Thank you all for being here. It's a great pleasure to see you all. Last time we met, Mr. Donoghue, I was working with Perrin Beatty at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce on the new trade agreement. I've now switched and I'm working in the private sector for Canada Steamship Lines, an international shipping company. So now I get to ask the tough questions. A new economic agreement may be in place, but on the ground, we're seeing more and more cracks emerge in the regulatory regimes between our countries. How do you see these non-tariff trade barriers evolving, and what tools are available to us to reverse this trend?
Well, the tools available to us are, you just watched them for an hour and 15 minutes. And that is, we figure out what's in the best interest. We get the three countries together and we lobby not across border necessarily, but at home to balance things out. There are always things that have to get fixed. There are always new ideas on the table, and a lot of them we don't like. We ought to listen and see if they help. If they don't help, we ought to deal with them. Listen, our biggest regulatory problems are going to be in this country, and we're going to work hard on them and try and make sure they don't affect our partners. I suspect we'll be talking to each other regularly on this. And if you got a real problem in the shipping side, let us know. Maybe we can help you too.
Right.
I answer more or less the same. In a very complicated equation that we have, obviously one of the variables that we have to deal is all of these changes, all of these elements that try to push us in a different way. And this is, in my opinion, the normal situation. The normal situation is that we have to deal with all of these pressures that we are going to confront. But at the same time, we have the structure, we have the communication, we have the capacity to lobbying with the authorities. And at the end of the day, most of the problems, or maybe 90% of the problems that arise, we solve it in the following weeks.
Will, great to see you again. And, you know, I again underline what my colleagues have had to say. Our three organizations work together, but the good news here, to my way of thinking, is the idea of North America is alive again. And if I look at one area of great potential for us after the beginning of January, it is the ability for us to look at regulatory harmonization. This should be for Canada very high on the list in terms of the areas that we're looking at to collaborate on. And I think that we'll be finding that the rhetoric that's divided us will be toned down a lot. And it'll be much easier for us to look for ways to harmonize what we're doing, to strengthen our industrial base, and to look for ways of taking some of the friction out of the system that's there today. But it's incumbent on all of us in the business community to work together to make that happen.
Thank you, Perrin. And Mr. Donoghue is clapping at you. This is all the time we have, gentlemen. Honestly, it feels like Christmas for me. It was a great conversation. Thank you very much. You've been very generous of your time, of your comments. Claude Gagnon, our friend from BMO, has problems connecting back to us. So he wants me to extend his thanks on behalf of BMO. I'll switch back to French for a minute. Alors, BMO est très, très heureux de voir la représentation aussi régionale parmi les participants aujourd'hui. Alors, vraiment, au nom de notre commanditaire, merci beaucoup pour votre présence. Vous avez été très nombreux à vous joindre à nous. un propos très inspirant, je pense, là, par les chefs de nos chambres de commerce. So again, thank you very much. To all the participants, you'll be receiving a survey on your way out of this webinar, so please fill it out. Our next event from Corex to last before Christmas will be next week, December 10th. We'll be talking about business opportunities in Latin America with people from Investissement Québec International and our representatives from Quebec in Mexico and Brazil. So again, on behalf of BMO, FCCQ, myself, thank you again. Have a great end of the day and stay safe. Thank you. Merci. Au revoir.
Merci, Charles.
Bye-bye.
Bye, colleagues.
See you guys. Talk soon.